All right, is this working all right? So, controversial statement to address your it's on green, yeah. So everyone cares about security. Like I've never met a developer who's like, if you ask them, do you want to develop secure code or insecure code? I've never met a developer that says I want to develop insecure code. What I do find though is that everyone cares about security until it's time to assign the budget and the man hours. Like if I ask a developer, do you have enough time, training, and tooling and budget to do your job effectively? The answer is always I'm being told to do more with less, and that's just kind of the reality, right? So without further ado, I guess I'll just segue into what I'm actually supposed to be talking about, which is into the hacker's mindset and how we look at applications and assess their security postures. So the agenda for today is going to be an introduction of myself, my background, and go through the steps that I would take to assess an application, that other pen testers would take to assess an application, some of the tools and methodologies that we use to do so, and how we stay up to date. So before I kind of move on, earlier we mentioned nation-state adversaries for a lot and kind of how they differ from pen testers. So I'll go into my background in a minute, but I just kind of want to take a poll. I'm sorry if I offend anyone here. However, if I say the term government employee, what is the first thing that comes to your mind? Super sophisticated or your workaday person just trying to do their job? Yeah, usually that. So what's the difference between them and a nation-state adversary, which sounds super scary? They're on the payroll. Exactly. They have an infinite time, generally a whole lot of budget, and they're being told to go slowly, in some cases, go slowly, work on reconnaissance and finding things out, as opposed to just, move fast and break things. All right. So I'll go into an introduction about myself. More importantly, that's my dog, Toast. She's kind of a menace to society, and she's kind of my partner in crime with how I do my day job, sitting there working away, and she's biting my elbows. It's great. So about me, I am a lead penetration tester with Cobalt. I am a dog lover, gamer, Star Wars nut. We talked about this earlier, hence my Jedi Order tattoo. I am way over caffeinated for this, so this is going to be fun. If you need to rein me back on track, please feel free to do so. In addition to being a pen tester, I'm also a purple teamer. So that means I kind of wear all the hats. So my fun job is I'm a pen tester. I kind of do that after hours as a contractor, freelance, and it's a lot of fun for me. My day job is I am a cloud security architect at Invenio LSI, focused mainly on serving the public sector, government employees, and higher education clients. And I am also on the weekends, I am a sergeant in the Air National Guard, working in a cyber unit where I do DevSecOps. So I kind of have a fun background where I work on the development team, I work on the SOC team, and I work on the pen test team. So I kind of get to see a lot of the same problems be universal. And I think someone made the joke earlier that when you work in security, no matter where you are, you're kind of the least favorite person in the room. So there's a lot of challenges that go across from being a pen tester, where my job is theoretically to assign you work, and then from being on the dev team, which is to fix the problems that maybe I introduced in the first place, and then being on the SOC team, which is my job to detect workaday adversaries, nation-state adversaries, whatever my scope is, whatever my threat model is for the clients I'm working with. So a little bit about my career. I touched on that earlier a little bit. So I have my bachelor's degree in computer science, master's degree in cybersecurity. I started out as a network operations center consultant and sysadmin. Moved on from there to work in a security operations center as a blue teamer, where I did a lot of incident response, analysis, pen testing, malware analysis, that kind of stuff. Went to cyber school with the Air Force and got some interesting technical training there. And from there, I was able to move on to Raytheon, where I was an information systems security manager, responsible for securing classified information systems against such adversaries. Throughout this whole time, I've been recreationally doing pen testing, bug bounty programs, cyber ranges, Vuln Hub, that kind of stuff for fun. I had a lot of great mentors on the way. And then in 2019, I decided to throw my hat in the ring and attempt to join Cobalt. It went far better than expected, seeing as I am standing here before you now. If you ask me what year it is, I would still say it's probably 2020, so I've only been working there for a year. Apparently, though, it's actually 2022, and we're in a time paradox, so here we are. Nothing has changed for me since 2020, so here we are. All right, so I will get into the steps that I take to assess infrastructure that you guys might host. For the scope of the session, we're going to mainly focus on web applications, although we will touch on mobile and network applications as well. Okay. I'm just trying to read my notes as I go. It's not going very well, but that's okay. So the anatomy of a pen test, how do we break it down? So normally it's going to start off with a scoping call, and this is where I will get on Zoom or whatever methodology works for you guys, whatever technology platform, and I'll have a conversation with the client. Generally, this is where I like to be, very direct, very frank, and what is the goal of the pen test here? Are we looking for compliance? Are we looking to use this as a training opportunity for our SOC? Are we looking to work hand in hand with developers? Or do you want me to just shut up and give you the report so that you can give it to the auditors? My favorite thing to do is to actually work with the developers, work with the SOC team, and that's kind of what I want to touch on here throughout this presentation. And most of you are smart enough to be able to go to Google, go to Reddit, learn how to do a pen test, and kind of run through this presentation on your own and understand it. I have high confidence in that. I also have high confidence that if I tell you what I prefer as a pen tester to do and how I can work with you better, that at least 30% of you will go back to your orgs and try to implement it. So for example, if you work into the scope that, hey, I want to work with you guys, I want my developers in the Slack channel, I want them to see your updates, I want them to question you, and to kind of learn how you're assessing their applications and their code so that they can make it better in the future. That's awesome. If I can work with your SOC team, so once I hit that attack and enumeration phase, I can work with you guys to see, for example, if you have Palo Alto, what are you seeing on the firewall? What do the logs look like? And how can you differentiate your analysis of unsuccessful versus successful attacks? Because at the end of the day, the biggest thing that most people care about is how do we actually be secure, and not just how do we have the facade of being secure and meeting all these checkboxes. So that's generally what I prefer to do, and whenever I get the chance to do that with a client, I'm thrilled. So I'm hoping that if anything is taken from this presentation, that's kind of what you guys take from it. So the first stage of the cycle is the reconnaissance phase. So this is where we're going to mainly focus on asset discovery, and this again comes down from the scope. So the majority of the time I work with a client, we'll do full scope analysis of your public infrastructure. So we'll look at the IPs, we'll see what's out there. We'll focus on the application that you really want to be tested, but I also think it's important for you guys to know if you have like credentials exposed on GitHub, if you have, the thing I've seen a lot of is, especially with a lot of the older clients, more mature clients, I guess, is there's usually some admin running a web server out of their house that I think is fun to find when it registers to charter.net. That's generally how you know. And then kind of just work through with that. Because at the end of the day, if I find it, that's awesome. But if you find it in the future, that's way better. So that's generally the checks that we're doing. So recon phase is going to be, we're going to go through your public scope infrastructure, your vendor infrastructure, if you're working with an MSP, we're at GitHub, GitLab running. Depending on the company, if you have acquisitions, we'll go through those and just kind of make a baseline of, hey, this is what we're looking at. And then we'll really zero in on the scope once we're fairly confident that there's nothing lingering that you don't know about. And if you do know about it, awesome. Accepted risk, not accepted risk. You're currently working on hitting that guy in the bet with a bat. That's fine. Whatever it takes to not have, random servers hosted in some guy's basement in Illinois. That's good. Again, I've seen it. I also get to have a fun conversation after this with a CTO about why it's better to automate pushing group policy to people's laptops as opposed to having your offshore team use TeamViewer to go into people's laptops and set it all manually. Didn't think I'd have that conversation today, but here we are. So yeah, you see a lot of fun things when you wear a lot of different hats. So hopefully none of you are doing that, but I thought that was hilarious. So I've kind of combined the second and third phases here of penetration testing, mainly to show that it's not really a linear process and it's more cyclical. It's more of like a mesh web netting. So it's always a recursive process. So a lot of the conversations that we had earlier, I forget who I was speaking with, but about the Cobalt checklist. It's good to see where the testers are in their progress and what they've gone through, but it's always good to keep in mind that is a cyclical process. So just because we've already tested one form factor, one vector, it doesn't mean we're going to stop there. We're going to keep going back through it as we define and find out more of the scope. So I'm not going to read all of this to you because that would be painful. However, I think you guys can read pretty well and take pictures as you see fit. But mostly what we do in the enumeration exploitation phase is we're going to be doing a lot of flow mapping of your applications, a lot of business logic definitions, and looking into data flow. So a lot of clients will give us their data flow diagrams. That helps immensely just to see where things are going versus where they should not be going. So usually so we'll go into the tools later, but I'll proxy all of our traffic through a tool that will tell me what's going where, why is it going where, when's it going where, and what function's calling that. So sometimes a lot of the folks that work with like their acquisition team and they inherit applications, they won't know that certain items are in the risk profile until we find it. And again, it's not necessarily that it's a risk, it's that you should know about it and then make a decision for yourself. So that's generally the kind of things that we're looking for initially. And then we're looking at, once we've done a full mapping of the application, usually we'll make some kind of like flowchart diagram or what have you, just to make a list of these are the endpoints, these are the functions, here's the different types of things we can test. That's when we'll start doing all these things that you see in these boxes. So a lot of access controls, authentication controls, logic analysis, input injection. So again, I was talking to the same gentleman earlier, hopefully we're doing more than just throwing, the sec lists, bottom tier traffic at it. Excuse me. So generally we do. So we'll throw that at it, and then we'll start there as our baseline, because most of the clients that we deal with, they're in pretty good shape. So we won't find any low-hanging fruit in that area. So as we're going through the checklist and we're going through filling out and updating the clients, we'll give you an initial status report that says, okay, we've done all of the basics, you're looking pretty good, we've tested the scope, now we're gonna go on recursive iteration number 2, and repeat everything we did with some of the more specific items. So for example, if we're testing input injection and you have Cloudflare blocking us, probably a good sign. That being said, round number 2, we're gonna go and try and bypass that and spend at least 5, 6, 7 man hours on that. That being said, though, if you do have a vulnerability in place, you have a mitigation in place. So that's good. That's a good posture to have. So that's mainly what we're focusing on there. And this is the phase 2 where I talked about earlier. This is where I like working with the SOC teams. This is where I like working with the DevOps teams, the engineers. To see what we're doing so they can repeat the processes. Most of the developers that I work with, they do have a license for Burp Suite. They know more or less what we're doing. What they don't know more is, unless you're working in the field, you're not gonna compile that daily knowledge of this is what works for Cloudflare, this is what works for something else. So you might be lacking in that area, but we're also more than happy to share that with you as a customer, and that's perfectly fine. I like doing that. My end goal of the whole engagement is to make you guys better. So that's what we like doing. What else do I have here? That's pretty good to move on. So lateral movement. This is more of attack simulation for the nation state actors. So in most engagements, we're focused on finding the entry points. And then the scope generally is that once you have an entry point, please stop. I don't want you breaking. Sometimes we test production. I don't like that, but sometimes it happens. So usually it's a development or a QA or a test environment, but generally it's just say, hey, once you get on a box, see what you can find and just don't do anything else. So this is where I actually like to spend a lot more time focused working with the SOC teams, because this is what you should be looking for as well as your initial entry point. So from my time working in a SOC, I can tell you that there are far more entry vectors into your network than I could possibly find on a daily basis. So for me, what's important is being able to have good processes and procedures in place and good training to know what wrong looks like, so that I can identify on a Friday night that, hey, this is bad, I'm gonna disable this account, as opposed to having to run triage over the weekend, implement a whole bunch of patches, and do X, Y, Z. Now, I might still have to do that, but at least I'll know where the problem occurred, so I can at least kick out the initial entry point. So with lateral movement, it should be, you can look at it as in two ways. If I'm working with a SOC team, I'm gonna do two things in succession. First, I'm gonna try to ring every alarm bell I can to see if you see anything at all. And then if you do, awesome, we'll scope it down and I'll try to move a little bit slower, a little bit more tactfully than just running, the basics. Like if someone logs on a box that usually shouldn't be on a box, then the first thing they do is run who am I, and your SOC team doesn't detect that, that's a good learning opportunity. So that is lateral movement. Post-exploitation is a lot of the same. So lateral movement is the first stage of that is going to be, I'm going to grab everything on that box, see who I can see who else is on the network, and then see where I can move to. Post-exploitation is going to be very similar into, this is the stage where I'm going to try to set up persistence. If I've landed for some reason on a MongoDB instance, I'm going to try and dump that, exfiltrate that data. Again, depending on what we're scoped to do, a lot of the times it's just, hey, please don't do it, just let me know, because I don't want to deal with the auditors. Not a big deal. I'd rather us find that than someone else. So post-exploitation, again, is a lot of fun. I also kind of had my brain turning earlier with talking about that CTO I need to talk to. Is that really his IT team that's team viewing into people's machines? Part of me hopes no, and the other part of me hopes yes, for very different reasons. So I guess we'll find out. Yeah, so post-exploitation for us is more so testing your internal processes and procedures, your SOC team, and seeing what we can find. So if we're in your network and we're ringing every alarm bell possible and you can't see us, might want to work on that. All right, going into the tools. So the ones that I use as a pen tester are generally different than the ones I use as a developer or as a SOC analyst. So as a pen tester, the main tool I'm using for everything is more or less going to be Burp Suite. It has a really good active scanner, really good passive scanner, and it allows me to tune it to what I want to do. So what this is going to do is allow me to proxy your traffic through my device and then run a whole bunch of tests based on whatever parameters I decide to throw at it, mainly mapped to the prior giant tables of data that I did not read to you because I actually like you guys. From there, do a lot with nuclei and a lot with SQL map. These are just vulnerability scanners, SQL injection scanners. Most of this you can read. A lot of it's pretty, does what it says on the tin kind of deal. And then I'll use Wapalizer and what runs to just generally do like platform enumeration. So if I'm looking at a WordPress site, it'll generally tell me, saves me a lot of time, not intrusive, and just gives me good data. Mobile, I don't do personally a lot of mobile tests, so I compiled this list from a lot of our testers in the Cobalt core who do, so I'm just gonna kind of parrot what the people smarter than me have said. A lot of them use MobSF, Frida, and ImmuniWeb, so I have used these tools in a basic capacity before. Again, that's not really my specialty to do mobile application assessments, and I'm the first to tell you that I'm not gonna sign up for a test that has mobile in scope if I don't know how to do it. But these are generally good tools that'll parse out a lot of things, like if there's API keys in the Android application, it'll parse those out and just have like a good first look at the application before we go into dynamic testing, which again goes back to the web application stuff. So a lot of crossover there. And then for network assessments, it's going to be a lot of the same. So most of us who've been in the industry long enough know what mmap is, know what a port scanner is, know what a vulnerability scanner is. I'm going to go through all those, feed in all that data, do some account scanning. I'm going to run in Packet for your network protocol testing. I'll maybe run Responder and then Bloodhound. So again, a whole lot of things that don't mean a lot to a lot of people if you're not a pen tester. But again, good to kind of take a look behind the curtain and see what we do from a basic level. I'm sure most of you, like me, you have a GitHub full of a whole bunch of stars for a lot of things I do based on what engagement I'm on. So all this really does map back to the initial OSINT asset discovery phase, and most of what I do is tailored based on what I find. Again, same gentleman having the same conversation earlier. It's like, I would love to have one giant checklist or spreadsheet of this is what I do every time, but really then it's going to turn into a BuzzFeed list of lists of lists of lists, and I'm going to want to die. So we just kind of try to keep it baseline and then specialize from there.
Do you have a tool that you use for managing all the information you get during the enumeration phase?
OneNote's pretty good. Would I love to have a commercial grade, ingestion tool? Absolutely. Is it feasible for the amount of tests I do and the amount of time I spend on it? It might be, but I've kind of worked on this enough to know that this is good. Now, that being said, there are a couple clients that I work on a recurring basis for that I have a contract with to do through Cobalt whenever they have a test. I'm starting another one on Wednesday, and I'm just wrapping one up today too. So for those engagements, yeah, I do try to do more than just the OneNote. So for me, it's a lot of, again, I don't have like one overarching system, but what I do is I'll build a lot of mind maps of this is what your application looks like. This is my database that I host of all the things that have worked in the past, and then I have a good starting point to go forward. So similar, when I worked as a SOC analyst, I was also the red teamer there. So I had an easy example, a list of passwords I know are probably going to work on someone. I know that we don't have MFA enforced on O365, which is phenomenal. I don't recommend doing that, but it's fun. This was, again, like 6 years ago, but still. So I'll just, I have scripts that I run recursively on a weekly basis, testing all new accounts, scrape from the internet and scrape from our Active Directory that test against this, and then I'll feed that into my system for this is what works. So that's a roundabout way to say maybe. Sure.
But a lot of the tools output as JSON format, and then they have these really cool tools that can feed it JSON, and it'll output like a wireframe
Yep.
of the JSON structure. So you can get a visualization of the output.
Yeah, so I'm blanking on the name of the tool that I used. Like, again, it's starred on my GitHub. But yeah, I use it for instant response mainly, but I use it kind of dual-headed for that too. I have no idea what it's called, so here we are. I'm going to rely on you. Have your phone, so maybe, yeah. Shoot.
How's the nuclear, which is the community-powered scanner, different from like commercial?
So I'll give you a good example for this. So in my day job, we're mainly an SAP shop. Nessus does a horrible job of identifying what SAP is running, what SAP notes are missing, and all that. Not that Nuclei does a whole lot better, but they do better. So it's more community focused. So I work with a pen tester, Nullinkole, I forget his real name right now because I'm stupid. Paul, there we go. So he writes a lot of my nuclei scanner code for me, and I'll just ingest them through his GitHub because he parallels more like what I do on a daily basis. So if I have a feature request, because it's an open source project, he can develop his own stuff. I'll usually go to him and be like, hey, please teach me how to do this because I have this one random use case. I don't know if there's a professional version of the scanner. I don't know. Okay, perfect. No, but it's like what's the purpose of running Nessus versus Nmap scripts versus Nexpose versus everything else? Everything's kind of different, and all the developers have their own specific use cases. So I use it a lot for like crossover and just to make sure that I'm not missing anything. I mean, there's a lot that vulnerability scanners aren't going to tell us, which is true for anything. Automation's phenomenal. It helps cut down my workload, but at the end of the day, a lot of it's manual.
Other security researchers in the community contribute to Nuclei a lot, from my understanding. So
Yep.
It helps keep up with the latest and greatest.
Exactly.
And
Yep.
you can write customized templates for very specific tests versus the typical DAS that's just gonna spray and pray everything, same every single time.
Yeah, I think a good parallel that I have to it is if you've ever heard of the tool called Ping Castle. I haven't used it in a long time because I haven't been in an actual like internal blue team in a while. We used to run that for our Active Directory assessment and like give us a whole feed, and that would be supported for let's just say you're looking at NIST 853, FedRAMP, whatever you want to call them, configuration settings using disastigs or whatever have you. You can configure that tool to look for that at your enterprise scale. But you could run Nessus with a CIS bench line or whatever, and you won't find any of that. So it's just different use cases. Anything else before I move on? This is good. Oh, here we go. Shoot, yeah.
Besides all these, I mean, these are all like pen testing. What do you do from a social aspect? Is there anything that you do that?
What do you mean by a social aspect? Social engineering?
Type of attacks or anything like that? Is that something that's part of your?
So that's something that Cobalt does do. I specifically do not. However, in the past, I've used things like the social engineering toolkit. I've run my own custom servers for that. I forget there used to be a bunch of free services and paid services that would let me templatize different phishing emails. So things I ran in the past when I was on my SOC team is we would do a lot of like UPS scam emails, a lot of what's the term for like scare you as a service kind of thing, or like, hey, I found your leaked password for Match.com. You should probably log in here and change it before I do something. Just dumb things like that. I don't have any specific recommendations for phishing assessment tools. The best advice I can give you is to talk to people at Cobalt smarter than me.
And make sure it's in scope, right?
Exactly.
Normally
So
it's not.
no, it's usually not in scope. So Cobalt, other pen testing firms, I ran my own pen testing company for a little while. Most people don't want that in scope because they don't want to deal with the headache.
It's interesting because that's what's happening in the real world, like.
So it's super fun, and here's a quick on the side anecdote that I dealt with my second month with Cobalt. Again, running all these tools is phenomenal, but the best thing that you can have in your internal company is a really good analyst who's looking at all the right things. Really hard to do, but here's an easy one. If you have a fresh hire out of college with domain admin privileges, that's probably a bad idea. So for me, a lot of the common things that I see, it's less about the technical aspect. Don't get me wrong, I'm technical and tactical, less on the strategic side most days. But a lot of the issues that I see recurring through Cobalt, through the platform, through everything else is, there's a lot of technical recurring issues that happen because some guy named Jim keeps making the same decisions over and over again, and he doesn't know that these are bad decisions. He sees, rightfully so, this guy right out of college, phenomenal, super smart. However, he's still new and out of college and might not know the business risks and maybe shouldn't have the ability to refresh production from QA. Maybe don't have him do that. Again, something that's not going to show up on a scanner, but things that we see with recurring customers, and that's for the benefit that for me, again, another aside, where Cobalt comes into fashion is that I get to work with a lot of the same people a lot of the time, so I get to know the different teams. And when someone comes in that's new, you get to look at them, you get to analyze them, talk to them, look at their LinkedIn, look at the different profiles, and then you can generally get a good sense of where they are and go from there. Sure.
Although social engineering is such a common effective attack vector, right? Like it doesn't obviate a need to get a technical assessment done. Right? Like somebody could click in, through your web application and not have to go social engineering. At the same time, a social engineering engagement can go super deep. Like we'll hit up developers on LinkedIn, tell them that we did a great job on it, so that get them on a phone call with a recruiter
So again, it really depends on your threat model and what problem you're trying to solve. So if you're trying to make sure that you don't have a MongoDB exposed on the internet, you don't have an S3 bucket public exposed on the internet, that's going to be a lot different than a phishing assessment. As a phishing assessment, there's a high likelihood that I'm going to land inside your network and be able to go from there. I think we all have been inundated with Twitter news about Uber and the subsequent fallout from that. Again, that comes from phishing, which starts here, not generally at the edge, it bypasses the edge. But when you're getting your application assessed, it at least shows that, yeah, I can't just log in and dump your database. So two important things, but different things.
Yeah, like Jim, fresh out of college, has all this access. He's a perfect target for that particular social.
Oh, he's phenomenal. Like, that's the guy I'm going to fish. I'm going to find root accounts.
Great job off there. Twice as much money as he can. So another reason why he shouldn't have that level.
How are we doing on time? Where's my time person? Am I way over? Probably. 10 minutes over? Oh, perfect. All right. Well, at least we're doing questions kind of as we go, so we're going to cut down on it. Sure. One more, then I'm going to go to this slide before I forget.
Yeah, so I know you talked about pen testing, but have you ever tried hacking into a Ring camera? And if you would, how would you go about doing it?
As an owner of a Ring camera, yeah. So for IoT devices, it's generally pretty much the same as anything else, except that it's going to be publicly visible. So there are two ways I'm going to look at that. One, I'm going to look on, again, I forget the website's names, but I forget, there's a site that I use that, Shodan, thank you, there we go. I'll throw in SSL certificates for, if I'm looking at cameras, and then I'm going to put in my IP address and try to narrow it down from there, see if I can see it externally. If I can't, okay, it's all right. What I'm going to do personally with it on my network is I'm going to analyze the traffic that's going into and out of the device, see what protocols it's using. I'm going to run basic scans on it like anyone else would, Nessus, Nuclei, Nmap, run some scripts against it. I'm going to check for default passwords, check for access control issues. Again, something that you as an owner of the device can do, similar to how I wouldn't do it to some Ring camera that you owned. And I'm really going to take it as a similar assessment to like a network assessment, because at the end of the day, it's just an embedded server running some random web application. So I'll assess the server aspect, the firmware aspect, and then move on to the application aspect, looking at all the same things that we just talked about here. So I did this talk at Boston, and I spoke to a gentleman at a BU who was very interested in like IoT hacking methodologies and, what should I do? I don't see anything in the wild, so I'm thinking about spinning my research team to looking at this, and is it a good idea? So on one hand, I'm like, yeah, that's probably a good idea because there's a lot of good variants. The flip side of that is it's kind of just a server and a web app, so we already have things for that. But it is good to have like different focuses for IoT. Like I spoke to you earlier about like car hacking and how is that different? I've never hacked a car, so I have no idea, but I'm going to start at the same place where I always start and see how far it gets me. And then I'll buy some good books from some smarter people than me and go from there. All I know is that if anyone here owns a Tesla, I don't know that I'd want to use beta software on the road. So good luck to you. All right, so OWASP top 10. I think we've more or less beaten this to death today, or it's more or less stayed stagnant over the years. Some things have changed from 2017 to 2021. I'll let you read it here. The slide hurts my brain, so I'm not going to try. Yeah. Moving into the last segment here, which is more, I'd say more interactive than not, is how do I stay up to date? So that's going to depend largely on myself and whoever else. So for me personally, how I stay up to date using social media is I'm going to be using Reddit. I'll rely on CISA and their bulletin briefs. Member of InfraGard, so if anyone here is private sector and not in touch with the FBI InfraGard, highly recommend doing that. Free organization. They do a lot of threat sharing, a lot of good talks by the supervisory special agents of your respective states and their field offices, and you get access to their fusion center for threat analysis and threat sharing. So again, another free shameless plug for something that you can do, no to low cost, get to attend some conferences, and it's a good time. I also am a member of multiple different Slack channels for NYC InfoSec, Boston InfoSec. I was in Mississippi InfoSec for a while I was on a stint there. That was interesting but different. And then a lot of different Discord channels that you can find from Reddit or wherever. So for me, it's less about me personally, it's less about the traditional media outlet sources than it is about gathering a community of people who are speaking the same language as me and the same vertical as me and can do different threat sharing. So quick aside, for anyone who works in a SOC team, there's something called, I think it's called MISP. It's it's a tool where you can do threat and IOC sharing. It's completely free, and you can just utilize that within your industry. So a lot of Discords and Reddits and subreddits I'm on, they'll do a lot of those IOC threat sharing within that vertical. A lot of it not very helpful, but some of it really is. Where it becomes helpful is tying that in with the data provided by CISA, provided by InfraGard and the NSA, especially if you're in a highly regulated industry. Good thing to look at. A good way to stay up to date, and a lot of it's going to come faster than like a news publication would. So for news publications, though, they do have their place, and they're great. I spend a lot of time, before I had a puppy, I spent a lot of time in the morning reading my Feedly feed, which I didn't create it, but I got it from one of my former bosses. So you can see, I tried to list out most of the websites that I do look at on a daily basis. So more likely than not, these days I'm looking more on the AWS and Azure side for my news outlets, just because that's generally what I deal a lot with. So I'll parse all my news feeds into one central location and just go from there. A lot of blog posts, a lot of write-ups, a lot of good, highly specific output from like Pentester Lab write-ups, where if I'm having this one specific problem, I'll go and look at this one specific article and kind of go from there. Community is a great source of information like we just talked about with Discord, Reddit, Slack, etc. Most of the time these days, I get a lot of my news from our Cobalt Core Slack, just because there's the hundreds of people in there sharing their different perspectives and different news articles for their regions. So one thing that I learned really quickly is that people in different regions see vastly different quality of articles written up for the same topic. So you get different perspectives, obviously based on who writes it, and different information sometimes, depending on how well they check their sources and cite their sources. So it's always good to kind of keep your mind on that, especially in our field where something that's true today is probably going to be false tomorrow, or at least expanded on and true with a caveat. And then finally is just the different conferences we go to, DEF CON, Black Hat. I've never been to myself personally. I went to the virtual Black Hat, I think in 2020, and that was pretty good. Besides RSA, Hack RedCon, and I live in Boston, so I don't know what the Wild West Hacking Fest is, but some of you might. So that's on the list, but a lot of different good conferences. I tend to go to a lot of the more smaller local conferences and a lot of the AWS, a lot of the Azures, because that's just my vertical. That's what I got.